Welcome to the second part of our conference today, Innovation for the Rescue. Certainly we see that more and more innovation is being called technology, data, AI, to help us to cope with the pandemic. Ran, so innovation would be the answer?
I think innovation is part of the answer. These are new challenges and we need new solutions. And we are fortunate to be living now and not 100 years ago when we had to deal with the Spanish flu. Nowadays, we have new armament. And we should use this armament at this time of need in the right way in order to allow us some sense of normalcy in a very, very unusual circumstances. So let's try and see how technology can help us.
Certainly, in this session, we'll see how we're using data, how we're retrofitting all technologies, whether AI could be at service at scale now. How do we use actually innovation in other fields in order to help caregiving? So now let's talk with Howard Wolf, who is the president and CEO of HIMSS, about how we use innovation and technology for the rescue.
I'm Hal Wolf, president and CEO of HIMSS, and Healthcare Information and Management Systems Society is a global nonprofit, an advisor and thought leader with over 80,000 members operating through chapters and communities across the world. At HIMSS, our mission is to realize the full health potential of every human everywhere. And it's our mission to reform the global health ecosystem through the power of information and technology. We have, in effect, pressurized the system. Our senior citizens, especially those with high chronic disease burden, are our most vulnerable population. Geographic displacement has never been under more stress. Hospitals have shut down. In many cases, clinics as well, of basic care. They're starting to reopen, but the challenges were there immediately, and we had to turn to areas like telehealth to support. Funding has recognized that we have gaps in our systems, and the consumers that are now in their home and can't reach their particular doctor or their particular environment for receiving care are demanding the use of new technologies in order to support their needs. And the growing staff shortages have never been more acute. Hospitals basically operate in two shifts, a 12-hour day, maybe up to 14 to 15, that is full throttle, and then an overnight where things are calm, more quiet. But during the pandemic, they've been stretched to 24 hours. And so the staff shortages that existed before, again, have really been pressurized. Digital health and health tech tools and capabilities have long recognized as providing credible support for the most of these challenges. With the pandemic and the advanced tools to date, they've really put the spotlight on the capabilities and the opportunities for digital health. Technology's role in healthcare has expanded exponentially in the last 20 years, but it hasn't kept pace with the social technology advancements of consumerism that other industries have already moved towards, whether it's finance or travel. And frankly, we've had to continue to deal with cultural barriers and sometimes protectionism, which are often to blame for the slower games in a healthcare ecosystem. Let's never lose track of the fact that success in healthcare is always based upon three important needs: people, process, and technology. Those three must come together for us to be successful. Inside our hospitals, we have seen the most rapid adoption and advancement of digital health over the last 20 years in just the last 6 months of the pandemic. And in many cases, the adoption has been successful. The systems and the facilities that already had infrastructure in place and had gone through workforce development advancements found the transition to scale of telehealth and the use of new technologies more easy, and the ability to serve during the pandemic crisis. But many circumstances where providers were uncomfortable with the tools, they've now been faced with the situation of using telehealth where before they may have had caution. And the results are coming in. People are now used to it. Doctors, clinicians, nurse practitioners are beginning to work closely with their customers, We call them the patients, the consumers, the citizens. And so what we see now is the recognition that on a short-term basis, we have significant gains in digital health that are fulfilling the needs and the mantle of our healthcare systems. We're ready to branch out. And government funding is going to be necessary for those systems to exist behind and utilize global leadership, because if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that innovation must be fed when the timing demands it. One of the examples that I've noted is from a close colleague of mine who works in a hospital system. They have 3 hospitals, and in 2019, they had 1,950 telehealth visits. Today, they're averaging over 2,000 per week. These are the kind of advancements that we've seen. So, what else is going on? Well, the government-coordinated efforts across the globe have focused really on, first of all, social engineering to push down on the pandemic. Stay at home, wear a mask, and manage your personal risk. But technology and information are really having their moments as well. Big data and artificial intelligence are helping to facilitate COVID-19 preparedness and responses. Countries that have mandated and maintained low COVID-19 per capita mortality rates have been sharing their strategies, and you've heard a few of them already, with more to come here at FutureMed. Early surveillance, testing, contact tracing, these are all examples of the uses of big data as well as AI. And the scale of coordination and data management required for effective implementation of these strategies in most successful countries have relied on adopting these digital technologies and integrating them into policy and care delivery operations. Again, people, process, and then the technology. At HIMSS and PCHA Alliance, we've been focusing on interoperability standards, leveraging supply chain solutions, and utilizing data reporting and expanding broadband deployment to address health disparities. Data is ultimately the key. Without it, technology and information simply cannot thrive. In our world of new technologies in the past few months, we see symptom checkers, self-triage tools or e-triage, and it's prime time for the artificial intelligence, with chatbots, for example, are being used in those e-triage and increasingly complex tasks. And finally, we're beginning to see full-fledged focus on 4 of the 5 most valued technologies in digital patient engagement: virtual care solutions, acute virtual care and eICU, patient portals, and remote patient monitoring, which has amazing upside and remains a critical link in future care and when mixed with clinical decision support. The promise of digital health and health technology industry is very strong. The pandemic has shown us that with proper data and information, we can integrate care delivery and a willingness to overcome cultural barriers. We can utilize these capabilities that have been present and drive new healthcare solutions to meet the demands of tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Hal, for this brilliant preview into the future.
So it's a pleasure to have with us Dr. Kira Radinsky, who is the chairperson and CTO of Diagnostic Robotics, and Uri Betesh, who is the founder and CEO of Datos.
Thank you.
We want to cover with you, as Ran mentioned, that the present is exciting. How innovation is entering the clinics, the hospital, and changing the way that we deliver caregiving at this time. So Kira, let's start with you. You have started an exciting company that changed the clinical triage. Could you share with us a little bit about what the company is doing and how it's becoming more relevant now at the Corona time?
So we as a company started to address healthcare loads starting from inside emergency departments. We had access to approximately 76 million visits inside emergency departments and primary care clinics. And we built an AI system that can read all of this information and then try to predict, based on answers to clinical questions, what is the probability of sending a patient to a certain diagnostic test, how urgent they are, and even reaching differential diagnosis. The concept initially was creating workflows to automate the 75% of the time of the doctor, which is not dedicated to the face-to-face meeting. We then realized that 30 to 70% of ED visits could have been handled in primary care. So we took our clinical triage system, this time for primary care, to start help navigating the patient to the correct location.
So currently in the corona time when many of the patients would not come to the point of care, would you take your system of the clinical triage and make it a telehealth solution?
So telehealth is just one way of talking to a doctor. But I think to actually nail this pandemic, you have to automate much more. You really need to realize whether this person needs to see a telehealth, should they be inside a hospital, or even be at home. So we started monitoring all of the population of Israel, large states in India, and even in the state of Rhode Island, all of the population, monitoring them, understanding what is their probability of having COVID based on their clinical triaging, and based on this creating epidemiological maps, explaining how the pandemic is going to look like in a few weeks from now. We then took the second step. How can we navigate them? We had access to billions of historical visits, and we predicted out of all of these patients who, if they have COVID, will deteriorate and needs to go to the hospital, and which can stay even at home. All of this helped navigate a lot of the care management protocols.
Boy, so that takes us actually to Datos and your exciting solution for the COVID-19 time, when many of us had to take the decision, if found to have COVID-19, whether we would go to the hospital or stay at home. And I understand that your solution played a significant role in the ability to have remote care automation.
So Datos is a remote care automation platform. Basically, we move care from the hospitals and the HMOs back to the home. And when the pandemic started, we worked with Clalit Health Services and the Ministry of Health here in Israel. And we put together a protocol for home hospitalization, home monitoring, to basically achieve two things. One is to protect the hospitals from the positive COVID-19 patients. And the other one is to provide care remotely to a large scale of population. And basically what the system does is we inject the protocol of the Ministry of Health into the system, and the system manages the patients automatically and provide a scoring, based on the scoring algorithm, provide a score for each one of the patients. And based on that, the physicians, the GPs, the nurses knows who to point to contact first.
Could I learn a little bit from the experience with Clalit, which I understand is now offering it to all of its patients in the home hospitalization? What lessons did you learn from this experience with Clalit at the COVID-19 time?
You know, it's very interesting because before the COVID-19, it was what we did. We provided a patient journey that basically we opt in. You had the ability to opt into that journey or to go back to the traditional care. Here in the COVID-19, there is no option. And I need to cope with Orthodox Jews. I need to cope with people that don't have smartphones or people elderly that don't know how to operate a mobile app or to go through a registration process. So we basically opened the platform, including text messages, emails, IVR, interactive voice response, in addition to the Datos app and all other things that we already do, like videos, integration to devices, data cleansing, and so forth.
Kira, I know that you as well in Israel now both did with Clalit project and with other care providers. What experience that you have with the doctors or the physicians in how they handle the data or handle the recommendations brought by the clinical triage or the automated software that you installed?
So our system was mainly predicting where COVID is going to spread. So instead of doing geo-tracking like many countries, which violates privacy, here on an anonymous basis, we created hotspots geographically around where COVID is right now. So on a daily basis, all of the HMOs and the Ministry of Health have been receiving a report telling them where COVID is right now, but most importantly, how it's going to spread. It actually started a lot of automation around this part as well, because you know where to send the COVID tests, you know where there's going to be loads. But this was perfect in the first wave. What happened after the first wave was very interesting. Less and less people started filling in the questionnaires because we were in this euphoria that everything is wonderful. And this is where we understood, just as mentioned here, is that you need some compliance from your patients to actually make this work. So in several countries in the world, they actually started making people do this, or at least making it harder not to do it. You want to go to work today? You have to fill it in, just like we're doing here in schools. You want to schedule an appointment with your doctor? You have to fill it in. And as well, we also realized that just keeping this anonymized is not serving all of the potential of those systems. Eventually, triage is something that is mapped to a person. But if we know who the person is, the company itself doesn't know who the person is, but the doctor should, because then they can call the person, they can treat them, and maybe stop the pandemic. Every 3 days that you take out of the time that these people just go outside, you've prevented a lot of the pandemic spread.
Oh, that's fascinating
I
outcome.
do have another we also worked in the US in quite many organizations. It's so different from what happens here in Israel. We have one accident in the US where a college implement our solution, and if you are not answering the survey, the symptom surveys, you are not allowed to access the Wi-Fi. So that's smart, right?
That's a motivation.
That's what we call nudge. Right?
Nudge.
It's a very, very simple nudge.
That's an effective nudge.
It is a very effective nudge. But which I want to touch another point, Uri, actually, about something that you've said. You know, people sometimes think that the solution to getting innovation on the ground is to make it more sophisticated. But I think that it's some of the innovation that we put in practice, we did the exact opposite. So when we saw that patients do not find it trivial enough to get their, for instance, pulse oximeters connected with their devices, what was done was something very simple, right? We told them instead of doing a complex thing, just put in the numbers into the software in the most simple way, and this frugal innovation made it work. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and I think that it's all from a perspective. When you design a solution, we have to design it from the perspective of the users. And if for me to do pairing is very easy, but not for all the people in the society. But also when we think about scalability, right? In the COVID-19, you have to support a large scale of patients. Now, if I'm going to send connected devices, I need to get them back. I need to sanitize them. They cost a lot of money. So the simplest solution usually is the best.
So, Kiri, the same approach. Some people really could not use online surveys, and this is where IVR comes in, right? So was IVR really important for specific subpopulations?
That's super interesting. So there's certain populations, like the Orthodox population, that they just don't answer surveys that you send them over text messages, right? So we identified those locations and had IVR call them. In certain populations, we've seen that the information coming from the digital form is very similar to the answers to the IVR, so we stopped doing the more expensive ones. But the concept is, no matter how you get the data, just get the data, and then analyze this.
I think that, fascinating, understanding of the dynamic between the patients and the digital system, understanding about UI, the economics, behavioral economics. I think we could go forever. Unfortunately, we have to bring it to the end, the panel, but we would love to continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you once again. To me, all of this discussion about the transformation of healthcare from frontal to tele of any kind, synchronic, asynchronic, distant monitoring, there's one lingering issue that we should always think about, and that is the threat associated with cyber attacks. You know something about that, don't you, Nimrod?
Indeed. We were naive. At the beginning of the pandemic, we kind of naively thought maybe the hackers would stop. There'll be a ceasefire for a while because they understand that the world is suffering for pandemic. Unfortunately, hackers, and primarily, by the way, Chinese hackers, not only that they didn't stop, but they actually accelerated their activity. As we're running a practice for cyber incident response, we started getting more and more cases where clinical facilities, critical manufacturing that relates to the COVID-19, critical actually centers, telecommunication centers, which are necessary at a time of coordinating public policy and response, were all under cyber attack. So we found out that more and more hackers were either disrupting service or affecting the integrity of the data, which made it impossible to trust the data sets. And most of them had the same motivation. They were asking for ransomware. And by the way, the price for ransomware exponentially grew just as the pandemic. If we were accustomed to ransomware attacks that were asking for $10,000s to resume operation, now we've seen with factories in Europe, some essential factories in Europe, some essential clinics and hospitals, we're asking for millions of dollars.
For one,
For one incident. So we had cases where companies that had to do with their critical services or had to do with the hospital services were asked to pay ransomware of millions of dollars. And now it's the dilemma. Would you now keep your policy that you're not negotiating with terrorists or you're not giving up to ransomware attacks, or would you save your operations? And for hospitals, as they were under attack all through 2018 and 2019, most of the time they chose to pay the ransomware. Because one thing that we learned is that the IT infrastructure in most of the hospital and the clinics was not cyber ready. Many of the hospitals didn't even have CISOs. They didn't have basic
CISO?
security information manager. They didn't even have basic hygiene like data control, data encryption. Access to the data was just as easy. And the hackers even abused the remote connections to the hospitals and to the clinics to get this easy access to clinical facilities or to the hospital data sets, affect the integrity, encrypt the data and make it inaccessible to the hospital staff. And we've seen cases again and again that hospitals, clinic, or manufacturing had to deal with a cyber crisis at the time of the COVID-19 crisis.
Let me depict this. So the CEO of a large hospital or a large manufacturing company gets up in the morning, he opens his computer, or one of his chief operating officers opens the computer, and instead of seeing what he usually sees, there's a blank screen telling him, you are now under a ransomware attack. If you do not provide this amount of money within 72 hours, all of your data, your systems, your everything will be encrypted or deleted, and you will have to withhold operations for days. Don't they, all of them, have some kind of a backup plan for this? Just, shut everything down, erase everything, and restart?
And you described it beautifully. That's indeed the case. You come and you have the blue screen with this option, 72 hours, the clock is ticking, what decision you take. Most of the hospitals, unfortunately, did not have a solid, not a backup plan, but kind of like a plan of how resume operation in time of an attack. Many of them were concerned that even if data, they'll be able to go back to the data from backup system, whether it's possible that the hacker affected the integrity of the data. And now let's take a decision. You are the CEO of the hospital. Would you keep operation? Would you keep actually business as usual when data integrity may be affected? And we've seen again and again forensic teams, which are these security companies that come and investigate the matters to come with a conclusion what the scope of the attack and how you can mitigate the attack, sometimes telling the hospital it would take us a few weeks to come to a conclusive answer because you didn't have sufficient logs, you didn't have sufficient data for us to get to the conclusion. So you are now faced with a decision. You have few weeks it would take to come to a decision, what is the scope of the attack and whether data was affected or leaked, or you can take a decision to pay now and resume operation.
That's a terrible dilemma, right? Because even if you had a plan, and you have a CISO, and you have practiced this, and by now that you know that if you need, you can shut it down and kind of upload additional data, there is always the lingering chance that somehow they got to your repository, they somehow changed the integrity of that data, they're threatening you, and now you need to make a very, very dangerous bet. So no wonder many of them prefer to just pay the ransom and get done with it.
And some of them, by the way, even made it public that they paid. Like the Los Angeles hospital paid $3 million. It got public a year ago. And some of them had another situation to deal with. Their patients' data started trading in the darknet.
Oh my God.
So now you're faced with the confidentiality and your patient data being traded, and you are facing a dilemma. Would I go and buy my patient's data? You're now bidding to buy back your data.
So I think I'm scared enough at this point to hold that discussion, but the take-home message for everybody involved in this is this is now a time of beyond all of the challenges. There's a great challenge of cybersecurity. If you, obviously, almost everyone have a plan, it is time to also test this plan in view of some of these questions. How do you, in real time, ascertain the integrity of the data that you've had so you can resume your operations without paying the ransomware? So this is, I think, a very important take-home message. Thank you, Nimrod, for these insights. Only a person that's been so well involved in cybersecurity all around the world at this critical time can provide us with this insight. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, man.
So I think we're ready to move on to our next speaker. And we are very fortunate to have with us someone who knows the Israeli ecosystem in and out, who has been taking very a critical part in nurturing the startup nation concept and the startup nation practice. So I'm very happy to have with us today Professor Eugene Kandel, the CEO of Startup Nation Central.
When COVID arrived, we were very impressed by the speed with which Israeli startups, Israeli tech companies pivoted and started looking for ways to apply their technology to solving the problems associated with COVID, a wide variety of problems. In fact, we started creating a landscape of COVID-relevant companies, Corona-relevant companies. We even have it on Startup Nation Finder as a separate category now. And we started in March with about 70 companies. By now, there are over 250 and maybe close to 300. They're coming on board every day. This is not just window dressing. We screen those out. They come from a wide variety of disciplines, whether it's life sciences, whether it's big data and AI, identifying all kinds of probable hotspots of infection, identifying people, what's the likelihood of them having corona based on auxiliary data, medical devices applying to completely different use cases, cybersecurity and privacy protection, mental health protection, supporting supply chains, all kinds of solutions that are helping the world to deal with this, with the disruptions associated with corona.
Thank you, Eugene. That was interesting. I mean, what are the enablers that allow for this rapid search on technological solutions in this crisis in Israel?
Many countries had to deal with the consequences of corona, and technology played and plays a very important role in this in this process. I believe that in Israel we had several features that assisted in this process. One is the smallness and connectedness of the ecosystem. That is one of the goals that our organization is trying to reach is to connect the ecosystem closer and closer. That helps a lot, because once you have the ecosystem connected and mapped, and there is a single depository of all the startups and all their technologies, and you know them well, it's relatively easy. What remains is to collect the needs and then to bring them together. So this is something that we've been doing since the beginning of the pandemic. This is something that we've been doing for the last 7 years in much less dramatic conditions, but it's something that really worked well. Also very useful is the fact that in Israel, the healthcare system is very concentrated. Clalit, for example, is the second largest HMO in the world, in one of the smaller countries in the world. So moreover, Clalit actually initiated, and another HMO initiated the creation of EMRs, electronic medical records, in the late 20th century. So we now have world's longest large-scale data, electronic data for a fairly large population, over 4.5 million people. This helps as well. And finally, we, like I said, SNC as well as other organizations created a variety of tools where companies, governments, and including, of course, Israeli government, could post their challenges, and companies could address, could find ways to address them. And so we've seen a very large demand for that from anywhere from India through Europe, Africa, and South America, and of course, United States. And this has been a very useful tool for us to connect the solutions to the challenges.
So how can we take advantage of the current challenges to actually encourage innovation?
While the current crisis represents a serious challenges today, it also represents quite a dramatic shift in the way we're going to live and interact between ourselves, as well as do our business in a variety of ways. And one of the most important ways that is going to affect the way we interact is through medical care. And digital health, which is basically bringing data and into this process of providing healthcare, whether it's in diagnosis, whether it's in providing workflows, etc., basically collecting, analyzing data, and issuing insights. And in some cases, it's actually either incorporated or combined with medical devices. And digital health is going to be the main winner, in our opinion, because not only that this is the only way for the future to deal with pandemics like that, not only it's the only way for the reduction of cost of healthcare in the developed world, because otherwise we cannot afford the linear increase in healthcare costs, but it's also the only way to make healthcare accessible to the developing world, especially in the times of such dire needs as we see now, which in developing world are much more prevalent than they are in developed world. And Israel has a very strong presence in this area. There are over 600 companies coming from a variety of technologies that have not necessarily been developed for the healthcare, but they are used in healthcare because, like we said earlier, people have pivoted when they realize that there are challenges that can be addressed with their technology. Whether it's sensors and big data and AI and anomaly detection, communications, all of these allow for very interesting solutions in digital healthcare, and strongly recommend exploring them.
Thank you so much for this, Eugene. Indeed, Startup Nation?
Indeed, Startup Nation, and exciting to see how innovation is actually emerging at a time of crisis. Another interesting phenomenon about Israeli innovation is how we take the defense sector, which was very innovative, and industrialize or civilize some of these technologies for civil users. Our next speaker is Dr. Daniel Gold, who is known in Israel for the Iron Dome, the solution that we have against missiles. And now he's the head of the Israeli Defense Research and Development and leading innovation at a corona time, taking defense sector technology into fighting the pandemic. Let's see that. Dr. Danny Gold.
Hello to all. It is my pleasure and honor to be here. I will talk about 2 or 3 main issues. One is what my organization is doing day to day. And another subject will be how we help the country to fight the coronavirus, and another how we work with the civilian world. So starting a little bit few details about my organization. We're in charge of research and development for Ministry of Defense and other defense agency. We are doing research and developing the technological building blocks and system for a wide range of application, air, land, sea, intelligence, cyber, command, control. So we enhance the scientific and technology knowledge in Israel, reaching superiority in technology. In addition to that, we have more mission like we are training, selecting, training, screening the elite personnel in high school, select them to the top technology leaders, draft them to the army. They're supposed to be the top technology leaders of Israel for the future. And the fourth one is we're in charge also of international cooperation regarding research and development and technology. This is more or less what my organization is doing. In recent years, we are working very closely with the commercial market, with the civilian market, because the market is boosting up out there with various technology which can be dual use. Dual use, you can use them in the variation in the commercial world and variation in the defense world. One, of course, is artificial intelligence and big data, connectivity, communication, Internet of Things, of course, 5G. new space. I will show you some movies, what we are doing by examples. This, for example, is almost self-own protection system that protect tanks against anti-tank missiles that shoot at us. You can see through intersection. This is a new autonomous fighting vehicles, new generation of vehicle. You can see inside the 3D augmented reality and all based artificial intelligence. This is our vision to use laser to intercept incoming rockets and missiles to create dome around the cities, around the formation, that everything that want to hit us will be targeted and burned by a laser. And this is, of course, the Iron Dome. This is a real operational results, intercepting 15 Hamas rockets, our enemy rockets above Beersheba during a ceremony. In the coronavirus, what I did after being in the Prime Minister's office for some out of the box thinking what to do with this crisis, we take almost all the capability that we have in the defense establishment. Capability is, of course, the human resources. I have many experts in many fields, devoted, know how to work, from research and development to produce the solution and assimilation in the field. And we put everyone into the game. We work together with my people, of course, university, research center, defense company, commercial company, startups all over the country. And we try to help. We send our people to the hospital, to the corona department, to the Kupot Cholim, to the Ministry of Health, understand what they need. We sit together and do brainstorming, and immediately went to a search for solution or create a solution. Again, from protection and reuse of equipment, remote sensing, standoff remote sensing. I will show some example later, using our own capability and AI software, and of course the famous production ventilators shortage of supply. What we have done, we implied our formal process that we do in the defense forces, but also a formal process. Instead of getting operational requirement or let us say exposed hidden need, we went again to the hospital and revealed their needs and analyzed the problem. Studies very fast. Some of the issues, of course, many of the issues have never been known to us ever. We are in the defense world, technology world, and we went to develop the solution. I can divide our effort, which is a massive effort, and I think it's the first time ever that we deviate our ship, very fast to deal with the medical problems. And as far as I know, it's never been done anywhere around the world. I can divide it into 3 sections. In the left section, we see a life-saving technology. Life-saving technology, the famous one is, of course, ventilators. There's a shortage of supply on ventilators. We can buy, of course, around the world from suppliers, but nobody sells to you because each country keep their stock for itself. There's a massive shortage in ventilators, and we are prepared to the big boom, thousands of people who will need ventilators. So I decided to take some small company, commercial company that have the knowledge or the supply in very small numbers, the ventilators, attached to each one of them big defense company, like Israeli aircraft industry. They produce missiles and the satellite, attach them together in order to ramp the production line using the capability of the defense company, and also ensuring the supply chain. Supply chain is all the elements you have to buy in order to assemble this ventilator, the supply chain. And now we have 3 companies. Each one is attached to a big defense company. They're all devoted to the mission. And we have a secure supply chain, which even now producing the ventilators. So we develop technology that you can sense the measures of the patient from standoff, from few meters away. You don't have to come close. Using laser or infrared or even radar, we take from the defense world the radar, and you can measure the measures from standoff. B, we connected all the elements from ventilators to monitors to a central location. We digitized everything. And C, which was a massive effort, we connect all the hospitals in Israel to one center that you can see everything, what is the situation of the patient in this hospital. You can go down to the certain patient and see the measure, how many ventilator we have, how many beds we have, what is the condition of the teams. Everything is controlled. We did it in few weeks, which is normally take 5 years. In few weeks, we put into the game more than 100 programmers and analysts to do it. So this is, let us say, preparing for the wave and activated, efficient, and in optimal manner. And the third group, which is very, very important, I call it game changer. Game changer is concentrated around test. Massive, fast, and reliable tests. Tests today, the regular PCR take you to do it depends where, between 5 to 7 hours or 8 hours. Only the test, the biological chemical test. You add the logistic from test to result can take you a few days, depends how much you're efficient. We want to create technology that you take the test and you get the result in 30 seconds immediately. And then you can open the economy, open the airports, you can act very fast. I want to reach to 100,000 tests a day. I give you some example showing some movies. What we have done is already, of course, activated. Here we can see a breath analyzer. You breathe 3 times to some tube. We take the tube to some machine, electronic machine. The machine gives you a result in 30 seconds. It radiates some electromagnetic radiation. We deviate this technology from defense to this area. This is another technology. You breathe again. You breathe to your breath, and then you put it in a small machine that smells the virus, and you get the solution again from few tenths of seconds. Most of the technology, some already assimilated in the field, in the hospitals. Some we are still testing them, passing for all the chain, of course, Helsinki committee, and getting thousands of patients to prove that the system can work. Adding layers of artificial intelligence, machine learning, because the system is learning all the time when you give them more and more patients. So I hope soon will be some activation in the field on authorization, Israeli FDA or American FDA, for the game changers. I think there are much more examples. The main issue is to take the creativity, the capability of work in uncertainty, to devote themselves to the target. This is our people, my organization and 1,000 people out of my organization, and working together to achieve the mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Danny Gold. Indeed inspiring, taking innovation from the defense sector and helping, at the time of crisis, the health industry. Let's see how we do it in practice. Rafael, Israel's third largest defense contractor, at real time, seed innovation.
Indeed, and I think what we will see later on in one of the coming sessions, and this is just a promo, we are going to see how they have created a respirator out of really de novo approaches and allowed, in this case, allowed one respirator to treat more than one patient. And I think this type of frugal innovation is something that is very interesting. We'll not go into it now, but in the 4th session, we'll see more of that. So let's go back to our plan.
Yeah, and in Israel, something which is unique, we have the Israel Innovation Authority. It's a governmental authority dedicated to support and help startup innovation. So it's, for me, a pleasure to invite Dr. Anya Eldan, who is the Vice President of the Startup Division at the Israeli Innovation Authority.
Thank you, Nimrod. Bioconvergence is the future of health tech. We're going to talk today how bioconvergence is going to create a future growth engine in Israeli economy. Israel Innovation Authority is a government agency entrusted with investing in innovation to promote sustainable and inclusive growth. And we do that through 3 pillars: enhancing the innovation ecosystem, enhancing economic impact of innovation, and enabling disruptive emerging technology, which is what bioconvergence is all about. Bioconvergence is roughly anything that integrates biology with physics, biology and AI, biology and nanomaterials, multidisciplinary approach to create a future of health tech. Following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we can see that bioconvergence is making an important contribution in every stage of the preparedness to the pandemic. So in the short term, we have seen wearable sensors, we have seen paper-based synthetic diagnostics. In the midterm, we see a lot of command and control software that helps identify the pandemic and help work together between health and economy. And long term, we see all the development of vaccines, development on fast diagnostic, development on therapies. All of that and a lot of that can be based on bioconvergence and convergence of technologies. For example, an Israeli startup called Barcode Diagnostic that created a very exciting bioconvergence technology for personalization of cancer treatment, were able to use the same platform to create mass diagnosis of COVID-19 patients. And there are many examples like that. We think that Israel is in a unique position to become one of the leading clusters in bioconvergence sphere. And I will explain why. Israel is a very, very multidisciplinary industry. We have very strong successes in medtech industry. All the large medtech players are based in Israel. We have very successful and very rich life sciences research. AI capability in Israel is world-renowned. Israel, in fact, is the third largest AI cluster in the world in absolute terms. And the government has invested substantially in enabling technology, both in the digital health initiative of about $300 million and the nanomaterials initiative in which we invested even larger amounts. So all of those together, we think, can create a bioconvergent ecosystem that's going to be one of the first movers. Some examples of bioconvergence: bioengineered nanorobotics, therapeutic discovery, 3D printing of tissues, optogenetic therapeutics. There are many different areas. And the important fact is that not only there are world-leading researchers in Israeli academy, but new startups are spawning as we speak, creating those breakthrough companies. And the three key pillars for building the national strategy in bioconvergence are research. Research is the most important part because most of the innovation in bioconvergence is going to come from academic institutions. So our goal to enhance the bioconvergence, the transdisciplinary research, our goal is to create partnerships between local researchers and researchers worldwide, and to create transdisciplinary education programs. The second pillar is industry. Israeli industry has been developing very rapidly around bioconvergence. We've created over 50 companies just this year. For our COVID-19 call for proposals, which we did on April 1st, we received 900 proposals within 2 weeks, most of them from the industry, about 100 from researchers. So the interesting thing about bioconvergence is that you can very quickly move from one application to another, as we've seen in the COVID-19. And the last pillar, which is very important for us, is global collaboration. We understand that Israel will not be alone in making this transformation. We need global alliances, we need collaboration. Israel has been blessed with hundreds of R&D centers by multinational companies based here who have contributed tremendously to our success, and we invite a lot of other players, pharma companies, medtech companies, to come and join us in this exciting health tech revolution.
Thank you, Ani Eldan. Indeed, inspiring approach and inspiring vision for the future.
I think yes, and it is a good time to move from the vision to the very practical challenges that countries are facing and how technology can help them. And we are fortunate to have with us Matthew Gould, which is the CEO of NHSX, a joint unit between the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England, that was set up to ensure that staff and patients have the technology that they need, and how their division have coped with the COVID challenges, and some of his views. So let's talk right now with Matthew.
Well, first of all, it's really nice to see you, Rand, and thank you for inviting me. The last few months have, I think, shown the value of technology, digital technology in healthcare, and given a massive boost to the digital transformation agenda across the NHS in the UK. And I'll pick out a few areas where technology has made a big difference. Not necessarily very advanced technology. In some cases, technology which has been well used in other sectors for some time, but not used in healthcare. So one is remote consultations. We moved very quickly when the pandemic hit to move the vast majority of appointments, both at primary and secondary, to a remote basis, either on the phone or online. And that's been extremely effective and very fast. Primary care, 99% of general practice surgeries now have the ability to do online consultations, and a significant majority of consultations are remote, whether that's telephone or video. Now, I suspect that after the pandemic, there'll be some balancing. We won't necessarily stick where we are. We won't go back to where we were before. We'll find a medium between the two. But the key thing is now the principle that actually care can be delivered remotely in a lot of cases and for a lot of patients has been established and will be more easily accepted both on the clinician side and also on the citizen side. So that would be number one. I think number two would be the use of data, where we realized that to manage the crisis effectively, we would need to have really good aggregated anonymous data for managers at national, regional and local level. So we set up the NHS data store with all sorts of protections in place, and it put the management of the pandemic on a totally different basis. And then the third area is it's given us a real push, both because of the necessity of the moment, but also because of some of the emergency regulations that came with the pandemic, to sharing patient data. So we've been able to get patient data flowing more, safely, but more effectively around the system so that clinicians can more easily access the information they need about the patients in front of them. And I think between those three things, I think a big difference has been made.
You mentioned use of data. Now, how was data used in order to promote better care during the pandemic? Can you give us an example?
So I'll give you a couple of examples. At national level, we were able to track quite effectively capacity against demand across the system. So we knew where there were spare beds and what sort of beds, whether they were ventilated beds or whatever. We knew where there was a requirement or shortages of different sorts of supplies. And so we were able more effectively than we would have been without this quality of data to manage the flow of supplies to where they were most needed. In terms of individual patients, with the agreement of our various sort of medical associations, the British Medical Association, the Royal College of GPs, we added more data about patients to what we call the summary care record, which means that if you were a paramedic meeting someone for the first time, or somebody presented at hospital who you didn't know, you could look at more pertinent details about their clinical history than you would have been able to otherwise. And we know that this has saved lives.
That's very significant. Would you say that AI, artificial intelligence, with all the hype, has actually delivered its promise up until now?
I think it has in certain respects. So in terms of extracting insight and understanding from huge quantities of data, we've seen, I mean, real progress made on our understanding of the data, on how the virus affects different groups of people, different cohorts, through the use of AI and sort of advanced data techniques. I think where it hasn't yet had the impact that it might have done has been as an intermediary between the clinician and the citizen. But I think that's probably a function of our the stage of our understanding of the virus. And as that understanding grows, the ability of AI to provide a sort of smart triage tool, I think, will grow as well. So its moment for that may come as well.
There's a claim, Matthew, that COVID-19 was an exceedingly effective accelerator of digital health adoption, maybe the most effective one ever. And you've mentioned some aspects of this earlier on when you talked about the adoption of online care and alluded to some of the symptom checkers. Could you tell us a little bit more about your experience in the UK and which digital health transformation aspects were accelerated during COVID-19? And what actually changed that allowed it? Was it regulation that changed? Was it acceptance by the physicians and by the unions that changed? Or maybe it was acceptance by the patients or just bare necessity?
One of the things we did early in the crisis that I think made a massive difference was we produced a really simple one-page guide to information governance for people working in health and care, saying essentially, if you are in good faith, trying to look after your patients and acting in sensible ways, then you're not going to get into trouble. And that was endorsed by our information commissioner, by the National Data Guardian, and it had a really positive effect because it sent a signal, look, just be sensible, do the right thing, don't get yourself caught up in knots over sort of the massive detail of law, but just get on with it. And that was extremely positive. And we need to capture that can-do spirit and sort of bottle it and keep it for the future.
That's really a beautiful way to end this interview, Matthew. It was brilliant as always. This was very enlightening and very helpful. I think there are many, many new ideas here that others can use and emulate. I know how busy you are these days, and I want to thank you again for taking the time and spending it with us all. I'm sure that many people will benefit from it, so thank you.
Thanks, Ran. It's great to see you, and I'm sure you're one of the few people who's busier than I am.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And we fondly remember the fact that you were also the ambassador to Israel just a few years ago. And Godspeed with your current challenges. So, Nimrod.
Indeed. One can remember Matthew was leading the cybersecurity back then when he was the ambassador to Israel. We had a lot of inspiring conversation with him about innovation. And now let's see how in Israel, the Ministry of Health is actually dealing with some of the challenges that we are facing, contact tracing and the use of technologies in order to help us control the pandemic. So it's my pleasure to invite Rona Kaiser, who is leading the Ministry of Health Information Technology Division.
In early February, we understood that we are up against a new pandemic. We didn't know what it is. Is it the Spanish pandemic? Is it SARS? Is it something else? The only thing Israel did know that it is reaching it very quickly and that we had to control the pandemic and the infection ratio. So what do you do when you have pandemic in your hands? Obviously, the strategies are similar to other pandemics. First, we have to trace the infected person. Then we have to understand where he's been in the last 2 weeks. Now, I don't know what about you, but I don't even remember what I did last night. So asking me where I've been in the last 2 weeks would be very hard to remember. After that, we also need to understand who he's been in contact with, close contact. 2 meters for up than 15 minutes, and that's a hard task. And then we have to make sure that those who were in contact with him go into quarantine and get protected. So obviously the problem was first, track those who you were in contact with. Then quickly notify them, and last, get them into quarantine. And this is obviously something that needs to be addressed by technology. And the solution was obvious. Mobile technology was the most matured one. But you know, mobile technology also has limitations, such as accuracy. We have to make sure that we know how far you've been, who you've been in contact with, for how long you've been in contact with. Also, there's a privacy matter. We don't want people to know where we've been, or for how long, who we've met. And you know, at the end of the day, I don't want people to trace my actions during the day. So privacy is also important. There also are other limitations, such as population that do not have smartphones. And what about if a mother gave her phone to her son? What about if I forgot it at home? So we did have to find out how to deal with these limitations, or at least acknowledge them. Also, technology was not the only thing we had to take into account. You know, when you come into close encounter with a pandemic, or pandemic in general causes panic, fear, and stress. And we needed to address this psychological issue of human behavior, the need for control, the need for certainty. So when taking all of this into consideration, we came out with 5 core values. First of all, quickness. We needed to stop the chain of infection quickly. So we needed to make sure that people get notified very quickly and understand how to go into quarantine as quickly as possible. Solidarity. It is very important to understand that this war, let's say, is not my war or your war. The solution is based on us understanding that we are a part of a community. And as long as we keep ourselves safe, we keep the community safe. So solidarity was a very important value. Also, simplicity. We wanted to make sure that the app would be very simple. The solution would be simple to understand. Reliability. We talked about it. We have to make sure that we are very accurate. We need to make the public be able to rely on the solution. And last but not least, trust. Everything is based on trust. And the government bringing up a solution, an app, which is talking about contact tracing, I must say that trust is a very interesting issue. So how did we do it? First of all, we talked about how quickly we get you into action. How do we do it? We integrated in this app simple call to action buttons. The information is very simple. You don't have to read a lot. The language is clear in order for you to understand what is needed of you and how you actually go through the motion. Designed for simplicity. Everything about this app is simple. We wanted to make sure that even if you are not a tech frenzy, you will know how to act and when to act upon. So simple screens, simple messages, simple language, simple instructions for you to follow and go into quarantine immediately. Manage for reliability. We wanted to make sure that the app is as accurate as possible. Now, this is something we are still struggling on because it isn't simple. It isn't simple around the world, and it isn't simple here in Israel. But we do have hope because we hope to launch very soon a new version of the app, which is not only based on GPS and location technology, but is also based on Bluetooth technology, which enables us to be more accurate. We also have the call center ready for you to call, and we also still have and will always have the staff pandemic investigation. And last but not least, I think it's the most important one, is the balance between the protecting of lives, the need to protect lives, and the need to protect our privacy. And I think this is something that was core value in the planning of how the app would work. We needed to find the optimal balance between that. And how did we do that? First of all, it's an opt-in of everything, opt-in app. You have to agree, you have to download it, it's voluntarily. Secondly, the architecture. The architecture is one that all the information stays in your device. The only way to share this information with the Ministry of Health is by accepting the share and not having you, and it doesn't mean that you have to share it. We have no knowledge of where you've been, if you got notified, if you got into quarantine, but we want to work on that trust. And for that, we also used open source platform. So everybody could see what we're doing. Nothing is in the dark. You can see everything. But the main important is that you have the control. You can decide what and when you want to do. But you also have the responsibility for your life and for the others. And that's an important key to make us work together in trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Rona. Ran, that brings to an end our second session about how technology came to the rescue at COVID-19. And indeed, I think we've seen some inspiring innovation and some inspiring startup taking their technology, adapting it to the COVID-19 challenges, and helping at a time of crisis in providing telehealth, AI for prediction, a lot of technologies of bioconvergence, taking innovation from other domains and leading them into the hospitals and the clinical care.
Yes, and I think beyond that type of convergence, we've also seen unique types of collaboration. We've seen the startups in the private sector, and we've seen the Ministry of Health in the public sector, and we've seen some innovation coming from the military and security sectors, and all of these people working together at a single point in time, trying to make things work in a situation that is unparalleled. And I think that gives us a lot of hope to the future and could lead us towards the next session.
Indeed, being part of the ecosystem, you see how everybody is working together, public sector, private sector, startups, investors, all trying to come up with some solutions for current needs. Indeed, inspiring session.
Thank you so much.
And that leads us to the third session of the day. Third session of the day will deal with how we accelerate science.
Indeed, we will have the chance to speak with some leading scientists, with some of the world's largest pharma companies and their top executives talking about some of their challenges and their aspirations for the near future, with some breaking news. I think it will be interesting for all of us. And we will also, I think, hear from the editors of the leading journals of the world, the New England Journal of Medicine and Nature Medicine, about how accelerating science and how to deal with some of the burden that this leads to the scientific publication industry. So this will be exciting to all.
What exciting and accelerating science is that there are some good science and bad science, and how you differentiate between the two at a time of a pandemic. And I think a lot of what we'll see here is how you adapt methodologies, both for drug development, regulation, keeping privacies and other values which are important at development, and keeping them in the same quality, but when you still accelerate the processes and try to come up with results at a time of need.
Indeed, challenges of acceleration. So, see you in the next session.